Hello, it's that time of the week again. We're going to take a break from looking at the provincial assay offices because I discovered two fascinating spoons in a lot, and I purchased them. I had to purchase them, and they're very interesting for people that find spoons interesting. So if you don't find spoons interesting, turn off now. But they are two tablespoons, silver tablespoons. They're interesting at first because they are both Channel Island spoons, which we looked at slightly earlier in one of the earlier videos, both made in Jersey. But what's lovely about these is they both have their original, and I'll try and let's breathe on those, and if I get out of shot, can you see? They both have their original inscriptions on them. They're both basically christening spoons. They commemorate the birth of a child, each one, and for the same family. That's the lovely feature. This earlier one, this large one, is by the goldsmith Jacques Quesnel of Jersey, and beautiful hefty marks on the back there. Often struck a J for Jersey next to his punch. Jacques Quesnel the first. This other one, prettier mark probably, more difficult to see I think, a little bit smaller, and that's GH under a crown. That's for George Hammond the First. And both of these silversmiths have a lot in common. The fathers began the businesses, the sons carried it on, and they both worked, father and son, passing the business on at roughly the same period. Quesnel, it's about 1780 to about 1840, 1843. Hammond, circa 1775, all the way up to 1835. So they're straddling the same periods of the 18th and early 19th century. Now, the first thing that strikes you is very interesting, or at least it is to me, as they're both working at the same time, that the earliest spoon, the 1805 spoon, this is dated 1st of December 1805, was purchased from Quesnel by this family. But 3 years later, in 1808, 30th of December 1808, they were nothing if not regular with having their children, weren't they? Always popping them out in December. This was ordered from Hammond. And you might think, well, I wonder why that was. And I wonder why that was. Did they fall out with Quesnel? Did Hammond give them a better offer? Did it not matter in that respect? Were they going to a third party, to a jeweller, and he was just sourcing them from the different goldsmiths as arrangements changed? But it's fascinating that they didn't stick just to one silversmith. It didn't seem to matter to them a lot. What we can tell, though, because these spoons are made within 3 years of each other, is we can compare the two goldsmiths' work. They've both got the feature, the Channel Islands feature, of Channel Island made spoons rather than spoons that were made in Exeter and London and brought in, of this very, I'm going to be out of puff in a minute, this very spidery heel. This, see it there and there, very similar. And you might see these spoons separately and think they might be the same. But having looked at them in detail, both slightly different dies. This is obviously Hammond's die that he's working with, and this is Quesnel's, but the same style. Obviously the Quesnel spoon strikes you as being bigger than the Hammond spoon, and we ask the question, is bigger better? Not necessarily. What I did do is I took the opportunity to weigh both of these spoons. Now, even though the Hammond one is nearly an inch shorter, it's about 8 inches, the Quesnel one is about just a smidge under 9, but it has got a little bit of wear to the tip of the bowl, so it might have been a full 9 inches. They weigh roughly the same. 1 ounce 13 pennyweight, 1 ounce 12 pennyweight, which actually means the Hammond spoon is a better gauge, it's better made. Now, is it a coincidence or just dumb luck that they use this spoon and the edge wore slightly over those 200 years, and they used this spoon, and if I catch it in the light, you can see the edge is completely untouched. Now, is it just they preferred using the bigger spoon, or is it actually a better quality, a better thicker gauge? Did it stand up better? There are also the matters of the reverse of the spoon, little slightly flat pip. I mean, it's still a beautifully made, handmade spoon, don't get me wrong, but the Hammond one is much better finished, tighter, just very nice. Yet the engraving on the Hammond one, I'll put pictures of Mark's and the engraving of these on Instagram so you can see the close-up detail of it, because we won't catch it with the camera. This is a bit broken, a bit weak. Quesnel, who engraved quite a lot of things, military prizes, lots of engraving, that's very tight, very crisp, very neatly done. So they have their strengths and weaknesses. So I was fascinated to buy these, firstly because you don't often buy two Channel Island spoons together by different makers, but for members of the same family. In fact, I think this is the first time I've actually ever seen that. But the second thing is, there is some later engraving on them on the back, which you might have seen as I was twirling them about. Now, normally, later engraving, we sort of throw our hands up in horror and look away. But this is, this is probably the cherry on top of the bakewell as far as these spoons are concerned. Now, I'll read it out rather than show you, because you're probably not. You can probably see there is an inscription done at least tastefully on the back and in a beautiful script. And I must say, from the engraving by the same engraver. So when this engraving was put on, it was done by one person. So these were clearly still, when this engraving was done in 1945, the possession of the same person, of a member of that family. On the Hammond one, we have Bernard with great-grandmother's love, 1945. And on the Quesnel one, we have Peter with great-grandmother's love, 1945. Now, that's lovely to establish the provenance. These had obviously been in the same family since they were made, so that was over 140 years. But what else does the date 1945 mean to you? Well, to a lot of us, to some military historians, or I think probably to anyone, it means the end of the Second World War. But of course, Jersey had been occupied for most of the Second World War, and whilst the occupation broke down in various ways, and there have been many books written on it, and the lack of resistance and what have you, it's certain that the last year at Jersey, when supplies were running short, it was very tough indeed for everybody in Jersey, no matter what their role was. And yet, I mean, one can only think, possibly, as the war had finished, somebody thought enough of these spoons that in those circumstances, those terrible circumstances, they would get someone on the island, because this would certainly be island done. There would be no question of sending spoons out and getting them back at that period, to get someone on the island to inscribe these and date them as dedications. Now, I think that meant that the family that owned these spoons, they didn't just have them in the cutlery drawer, they appreciated them for what they were. They'd gone down in the family as the family spoons, as the family silver, and even through all that hardship of the Second World War, they were treasured and then they were gifted by a family member. What's curious, or maybe it isn't at all, is that even though one went to Bernard and one went to Peter, they still nearly, I suppose time is dragging on, but nearly 90 years later, they still remained together when I purchased them. So I don't think they've ever really been apart, even though they are two individual spoons by two different makers for two different members of the same family. But they were just fated to stay together. And this is the joy of antiques. You get it twice. You get your joy out of antiques twice. You have the object. You know, you have a sterling silver spoon, beautifully hand wrought in the Channel Islands, which itself is rare, and surviving and marked and wonderful. But then you have all that family history as well. And even though I'm not a genealogist and I can't trace these things, I would imagine that with these initials and these dates, you would be able to discover, you know, with some diligence and patience, the original owners of these spoons and possibly trace the whole family, all the way to great grandmama in 1945 and Bernard and Peter. So I'm very happy to be able to show you those, show you the slight differences that two working silversmiths in a very small area. I mean, everyone on Jersey knows everybody, so the fact that one is making slightly smaller spoons to a better quality and one is making slightly larger ones, did it matter? Did it appeal to one client and not the other? But there we are. I've got diverted this week, had to show you these. I hope you've enjoyed seeing them. And obviously, as I find more interesting things on my scourings through the auction world and the antiques world and dealers and goodness knows what, I'll bring them here and I'll show them to you, and hopefully you'll enjoy it, learn something and find it interesting too. But until next week then, goodbye and good antiques hunting.